I never thought I'd live to see bulldozers rip through the same soil my grandfather once tilled with his bare hands, soil that carried the sweat of 3 generations, soil that held more history than the gleaming subdivisions creeping up around it ever could. But that day hadn't come yet. At least, not in the beginning. Back then, all I had was peace and pride, and 25 acres of land that had been whittled down from the 120 my grandfather, Walter Carter Sr., had purchased in 1903 with every penny he had. I still have the deed he framed, signed by President Theodore Roosevelt himself, hanging above the fireplace in my study. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a promise. A legacy. My father used to say, "Son, this land will outlive us all if you respect it," and I believed him with all my heart. We weathered storms, droughts, and the slow encroachment of suburbia. I watched as the 2-lane country road turned into a 6-lane highway, as pastures became parking lots, and as strip malls sprouted where sunflowers used to sway. But I held on to those last acres, adapting like my grandfather taught me. Instead of mass-market crops, I focused on specialty heritage corn, varieties so rare they could trace their lineage back to seeds my grandfather saved during the Dust Bowl. Chefs from across the country called me for samples, universities requested kernels for research, and boutique grocers proudly displayed my corn, labeling it as heritage grown with history. When Maple Ridge Estates broke ground next to my property 10 years ago, I'll admit I was uneasy. But the first wave of neighbors proved friendly enough. Parents brought their kids to see how real corn grew, not the polished ears wrapped in plastic at the supermarket. Some evenings, I'd wave from my tractor as homeowners strolled along the fence line with ice cream cones in hand, telling their kids stories about farmers. I almost started to believe that maybe, just maybe, suburban sprawl and traditional farming could share the horizon. And then she arrived. Victoria. Immaculate business suits, not a hair out of place, high heels clicking on gravel as if she owned the ground beneath them. From the moment her luxury SUV rolled down that dusty road and she stepped out, clipboard in hand, I knew peace was over. The way she looked at my fields, not with curiosity or respect, but with calculation, told me everything. To her, my cornfield wasn't heritage. It wasn't history. It was an obstacle. It didn't take long for her intentions to show. She came knocking one bright afternoon, all charm and corporate smiles, handing me a folder with a generous offer for my remaining acres. 60% below market value. I laughed, politely handed it back, and watched her expression shift from sugar-sweet to stone-cold. "You should reconsider," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "This area is changing." I stood in my doorway, arms crossed, and told her plainly, "Not for me, it isn't." The campaign began within days. Letters complaining of odors, from an organic farm that hadn't used chemical fertilizer in decades. Noise complaints about my tractor, the same one they used to wave at. Anonymous calls to the health department alleging illegal pesticides. County inspectors showing up unannounced. I started documenting every incident, every letter, every visit, time-stamped and photographed. But the worst wasn't what she did in plain sight. It was what she did in secret. One evening, Frank, my neighbor from 2 doors down and a retired engineer who had always been friendly, knocked on my door with a grave look on his face. "Sam," he said quietly, "I overheard something at the golf club. Victoria's not just doing this for the HOA. She's got a private deal with developers lined up. If your land goes, she's looking at a personal payout." My stomach twisted. This wasn't about community beautification. It was greed, pure and simple. And she had just declared war. Frank's warning settled in my gut like a stone, heavier with each passing day. It explained everything, the sudden flood of complaints, the inspectors poking around for violations that didn't exist, the smug confidence in Victoria's eyes. She wasn't just doing her job as HOA president. She was orchestrating a quiet conquest, playing the long game for a payday that would come when my land fell into developers' hands. I thought documenting every letter and complaint would protect me. I thought proof would matter. But Victoria was 3 steps ahead. The harassment escalated in ways I couldn't have imagined. One morning, I woke to find tire tracks carved deep into the rows of my field, corn stalks flattened and broken. My irrigation lines were slashed clean through, the ends left hanging like open wounds. I installed new cameras, only to find them smashed within a week, wires dangling, lenses shattered. I filed reports with the sheriff, but they could only shrug. No evidence. No suspects. Just another farmer's troubles. Then came the silence where there should have been noise. The local paper, which had shown interest in telling the story of my heritage corn and the battle I was facing, suddenly went cold. My calls weren't returned. Emails unanswered. It wasn't until Frank came by again, shaking his head with disgust, that I learned why. Victoria had cornered the editor, threatening to leak sensitive information about the paper's financial dealings if they printed anything that could damage her image or her development plans. She didn't just control the HOA. She controlled the narrative. But I kept going, because I had no other choice. I had mouths to feed, bills to pay, and a daughter preparing to walk across a stage and accept her doctorate in agricultural science, the culmination of a dream that began long before she was born. Emily had worked harder than anyone I knew, and nothing was going to stop me from watching her take that diploma. That morning, I pressed my best suit and shined my shoes. For a few precious hours, I let myself feel pride. I sat in that auditorium, watching my daughter stand tall, her speech ringing through the hall as she spoke of resilience, of family legacy, of adapting to change without losing your roots. My phone buzzed in my pocket once, twice, then over and over again. But I ignored it. This moment belonged to her. Only when the ceremony ended did I glance at my phone. 12 missed calls from Tom, my neighbor, and a string of frantic messages. Where are you? They're at your farm. Bulldozers. Call me now. I don't remember the drive home. Just the roar of the engine and the sick weight in my chest. As I crested the hill, I saw them, massive yellow machines tearing through my fields like they owned the earth itself. Clouds of dust billowed into the sky as 5 acres of heritage corn were chewed up and spit out in twisted stalks and broken ground. My heart clenched. This wasn't just a field. It was my grandfather's dream. My father's labor. My life. The sheriff's cruiser blocked my driveway. I slammed the brakes, throwing the car into park and running toward the chaos, my tie flapping over my shoulder. The sheriff, a man I'd known since he was a deputy fresh out of the academy, wouldn't meet my eyes as he handed me a folded document. "County order," he muttered. "My hands are tied." And there she was. Victoria. Standing at the edge of the destruction in a pristine white suit, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve as if the chaos around her was merely an inconvenience. I stormed toward her, rage burning hot in my veins. She smiled that corporate smile that never touched her eyes. "Perhaps now you'll reconsider our standing offer," she said sweetly. "Though, I should mention, the price has been adjusted downward to account for the cleanup costs." I couldn't breathe. I unfolded the document in trembling hands, scanning legal language that blurred through my anger. They'd invoked a visual nuisance ordinance from 1954, buried in county law, allowing for the removal of agricultural displays deemed unsightly by community standards. Notice had been published, in a classified ad buried deep in a newspaper I didn't read, scheduled for the same day as my daughter's graduation, a date I had announced months earlier at a community meeting. They planned it all. Down to the hour. By sunset, my field was nothing but churned dirt and broken memories. But Victoria's cruelty didn't end with destruction. That evening, Frank sent me a video from his phone. The clubhouse lights blazed bright, laughter spilling into the night as Victoria and her board members toasted with champagne, celebrating their victory. Her voice carried through the speakers as she raised her glass, to progress, and to finally clearing the old relic out of the way. I sat on my porch, watching the lights dance across the night sky while my field lay in ruins, my hands shaking with helpless fury. In that moment, I thought maybe she was right. Maybe the world had moved on. But then I remembered my grandfather's words, etched in the margins of his old journal: they can take the crop, but they cannot take the land unless you let them. The night after the destruction felt endless. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, legal letters, and the suffocating silence of defeat. The farmhouse, once filled with the comforting hum of routine, irrigation systems clicking on at dawn, the rustle of cornstalks in the breeze, felt hollow, stripped bare just like the field outside. My daughter called from campus, her voice filled with sympathy and guilt for not being there. I told her to focus on her future. But as soon as the call ended, I dropped my head into my hands, fighting the weight that pressed down on my chest. I needed guidance, something stronger than fury or bitterness. So I went to the old cedar chest in the attic, the one my grandfather had carried west with him over a century ago. Inside, I found what I didn't know I'd been searching for. Beneath layers of neatly folded shirts and faded photographs, tucked inside the cover of his worn leather Bible, lay a bundle of brittle documents. Among them, an old survey map from 1937, drawn in careful hand, each line precise, each notation clear. There it was, a drainage easement, granted in perpetuity, cutting right through what was now Maple Ridge Estates. A legal artery, hidden beneath decades of construction and paperwork, waiting for someone to remember it existed. My heart raced. I took the map and every other document I could find, tax receipts, correspondence, water rights agreements, and laid them out across the dining table. By sunrise, the evidence formed a complete story. My grandfather had secured this easement not just for himself, but for his heirs. The path was undeniable, and the language crystal clear: any obstruction of the natural drainage flow was illegal unless formally terminated through court order, something Victoria had overlooked in her greed and arrogance. I drove straight to the county records office, the map clutched tightly in my hand. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes and a sharp mind, helped me comb through decades of land use filings. He confirmed what I was beginning to believe: no record of termination, no legal override. The developers had either missed it or, more likely, buried it deliberately when they built the clubhouse. I called Ellen Turner that afternoon. She arrived at my house with a leather briefcase and a fire in her eyes. As she flipped through each document, her nods became sharper, more confident. "This isn't just an oversight," she said finally. "This is fraud. They claimed there were no easements when they applied for permits." She tapped the developer's signature line on the permit application. "That's going to be their undoing." I finally felt hope flicker back to life, but Victoria wasn't done playing dirty. Just 2 mornings later, I woke to the roar of an engine near the edge of my property. At first, I thought it was another inspector. But what I found made my stomach churn. A cluster of rusted chemical barrels, half submerged in the brush along my fence line, leaking something foul-smelling into the soil. Within hours, a county health inspector arrived, armed with anonymous photographs accusing me of illegal dumping. I knew immediately what had happened. Victoria had planted them, staged evidence in a final, desperate bid to ruin me. The inspector, an older man with years of experience, seemed skeptical but professional. I showed him the age of the barrels, the clear signs they had been dumped recently, far too rusted to be mine, but not rusted enough to have sat for long. He took samples and, after a tense silence, quietly told me he'd file a report noting the inconsistencies. Off the record, he muttered, "You've got enemies with deep pockets. Be careful." I wanted to confront Victoria right then, but Ellen cautioned patience. We had something stronger than anger, we had the law. Over the next 2 weeks, Ellen and I worked late into the night. We brought in environmental engineers, had surveyors map the drainage path with laser precision, and documented every obstruction built illegally on that easement. We sent certified letters to every member of the HOA board, complete with historical maps and legal citations, demanding they remove any obstructions within 30 days. Victoria's response was a single-page letter: outdated easements are unenforceable. Any attempt to interfere with HOA property will be met with swift legal action. Ellen read it and laughed. She has no idea what's coming. As the first storm clouds gathered on the horizon and the forecast predicted the heaviest rainfall in decades, I stood at the edge of my barren field, watching the sky darken. My drainage channels were ready. My documentation was airtight. I wasn't just fighting back. I was about to let nature, and the law, speak for me. The storm rolled in heavy and slow, the sky bruised with swirling gray as if nature itself was brooding. I stood at the edge of my property as the first fat drops struck the dry earth, darkening the soil that, just weeks before, had been alive with stalks of heritage corn. Now it was bare, but beneath that emptiness lay something far more powerful than crops, the truth, documented and unstoppable. I double-checked every drainage channel, every carefully engineered runoff path, each one leading exactly where it was legally meant to go. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't sabotaging a thing. I was simply restoring the natural flow that my grandfather had protected decades ago, long before Victoria ever set foot on this land. By nightfall, the rain was relentless. Sheets of water hammered against the roof as I sat at the kitchen window, watching the downpour flood the channels. The runoff began to surge, carrying with it the natural byproducts from the livestock pens I'd installed, all perfectly legal, all documented with inspections and environmental sign-offs. The water took the path of least resistance, following the old easement line, cutting through the subdivisions and straight toward the HOA clubhouse. I knew what was happening long before the phone rang. It was Frank, his voice tight with disbelief and glee. "Sam, you won't believe this. Victoria's up there accepting some community beautification award, and the clubhouse floor is starting to bubble." I could almost see it in my mind, polished floors giving way to brown water creeping in from beneath, guests in cocktail attire glancing around with confusion that would soon turn to panic. The storm didn't let up. For hours, the runoff pushed through its ancient route, doing exactly what it was always meant to do. I sat in silence, picturing the chaos. Frank confirmed it the next morning, nearly breathless with excitement. Victoria was mid-speech, standing beneath a banner that read "Excellence in Community Vision," when the floor bulged beneath her feet. At first, people thought it was just a plumbing issue. But then the smell hit, unmistakable, sour and raw, a pungent blend of manure-rich runoff water pouring up through the floorboards. The scene descended into utter chaos. Women in heels screamed as water rose around their ankles, men in tailored suits splashed toward the doors, slipping on slick tiles. Catering staff abandoned trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet scrambled, instruments held high above the filth. And Victoria, in her immaculate white dress, stood on a chair, yelling for someone to stop it, demanding answers from people who could only stare in horror. But Victoria wasn't finished with her cruelty. The next day, while trying to salvage what remained of her crumbling image, she went even lower. She leaked clips from Emily's graduation speech to local social media, twisting her words about resilience and embracing change. In Victoria's edited version, it sounded like my own daughter had called for my farm to be replaced by modern progress. "Even his daughter agrees it's time to move on," she posted with a smug caption. But this time, the community saw through her. The comments flooded in, filled with outrage at her manipulation. Mothers who once complained about tractor noise were now demanding her resignation. The HOA called an emergency meeting to contain the fallout, and though I wasn't invited, Frank kept me updated. Victoria raged at the podium, demanding immediate legal action against me. That's when Ellen entered, calm and unshaken, carrying binders of documentation. She passed copies to every board member, her voice clear and unwavering. "My client has restored the historical drainage system," she explained. "The easement has been legally recorded since 1937, never terminated. Your clubhouse was built in violation of that easement." Victoria's face turned scarlet as board members flipped through the papers, seeing undeniable proof. She screamed that this was sabotage, but Ellen's response was measured. "This isn't sabotage, Mrs. Harrington. It's nature following a path you tried to erase." The environmental inspector arrived the next morning, reviewed every inch of my drainage system, and signed off on it with no violations. The county prosecutor declined to press charges, calling it a civil property rights matter. Victoria's last desperate move was to file for an emergency injunction. But in court, with Ellen presenting decades-old documents and photographic evidence of fraudulent building permits, the judge shut her down. "This easement is valid," she said firmly. "The plaintiff built in violation of a recorded legal right-of-way. Your claims are denied." I left that courtroom not just vindicated, but knowing Victoria's empire was crumbling. And nature had delivered the first blow. Victoria's downfall wasn't swift, it was a slow, public unraveling that everyone could watch and no one could stop. After the courtroom defeat, her iron grip on the HOA slipped through her manicured fingers like sand. Homeowners who once whispered their frustrations behind closed doors now spoke openly, demanding answers for the disaster she had created. Property values in Maple Ridge Estates, once touted as premium thanks to beautiful open views, plummeted as real estate listings were forced to disclose ongoing legal disputes and drainage issues. Buyers backed out, and those who stayed faced special assessments to cover repairs the insurance company flatly refused to pay. Their reason? Building on a recorded, active easement voided their coverage. Victoria had gambled on deception, and now the entire community was paying the price. At the next HOA meeting, chaos erupted. Residents shouted over one another, demanding Victoria's resignation. Frank, the quiet neighbor who had once just nodded politely over the fence line, stood up and delivered a blistering speech that ended with thunderous applause. By the end of that meeting, Victoria was forced to resign, her final words dripping with bitterness. "I was only trying to increase property values for all of you." But no one clapped. No one thanked her. She left the clubhouse with her head down, the same clubhouse now marked by yellow caution tape and water stains that refused to fade. Frank was elected the new HOA president by unanimous vote, and he showed up at my front door the very next morning. No smugness, no arrogance, just sincerity. "We'd like to make things right," he said simply. And they did. Full compensation for my destroyed crops. Reimbursement for every legal expense. A printed public apology in the local paper. But more than that, they drafted a legally binding covenant that permanently protected my right to farm without interference. What came next was something I never expected: collaboration. The new HOA marketing committee approached me, asking if I'd help them rebrand the community. Together, we turned what had been a battleground into something beautiful. Maple Ridge Estates became known for embracing its agricultural roots. The clubhouse was rebuilt with proper drainage, and each year we now host a heritage corn festival. Children who once played in perfectly manicured backyards now run through rows of corn, learning about history, soil, and resilience. Victoria's house sat on the market for 8 long months, eventually selling for 40% less than what she paid. The new owners, a young couple with 2 small children, knocked on my door their first day. "We've heard the whole story," the husband said. "Just wanted you to know, we're proud to live next to this farm. These days, I walk the fields at dawn and look out over stalks swaying in the breeze. My grandfather's legacy endures, not just in the soil, but in the hearts of people who finally understand why it matters. Justice didn't come from vengeance, it came from patience, persistence, and knowing the law better than those who tried to twist it." And as I stand beneath the same wide sky that watched my family plant those first seeds, I can't help but wonder. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.